And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write the words of the Holy One, the true One, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one will open. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Of all the 7 churches mentioned in these early chapters of Revelation, the church at Philadelphia is perhaps the most encouraging. 2 of the churches receive no criticism from Jesus at all: Smyrna and Philadelphia. Philadelphia was not large, influential, wealthy, or impressive, yet Jesus had nothing negative to say about it. When we compare the last 3 churches, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, they form a striking contrast. Sardis had a reputation for being alive, but was spiritually dead. Laodicea was wealthy, but lukewarm. In between them was little Philadelphia, small, struggling, but faithful. The believers there must almost have held their breath as the letter was read out aloud. After hearing such stern words to Sardis, they may well have wondered, what is Jesus going to say to us? Then came the immense relief: no rebuke, no condemnation, only encouragement, promises, and praise. To understand the letter, we must first understand the city. Philadelphia stood at a strategic point where 3 districts met: Lydia, Mysia, and Phrygia. It was a cross-point of road and river routes and became known as the gateway to the east. The city had been founded deliberately as a missionary outpost of Greek culture. The Jews wanted to spread their language, philosophy, customs, and way of life further inland into Asia Minor. Philadelphia, therefore, existed to spread a message and a culture. This gives great significance to the Christian church planted there. Jesus was saying, in effect, the city was founded to spread Greek culture, but now I want it to spread my gospel. The region itself was volcanic. The fertile lava soil produced excellent vineyards, and so the chief god of the city was Dionysius, the god of wine. But the area was also dangerous. Earthquakes were frequent, buildings collapsed regularly, and people often had to flee outside the city for safety. The inhabitants lived in continual insecurity. That explains why Jesus later says in verse 12, "He will be secure and will go out no more." To the people of Philadelphia, those words had real meaning. They knew what it was to run out of the city in fear for their lives. The city was constantly being rebuilt after earthquakes. As a result, the imagery of pillars, doors, keys, and buildings in the letter would have spoken powerfully to them. The city was founded by King Attalus II. He was famous for his loyalty and affection towards his brother Eumenes, and so the city was named Philadelphia, meaning brotherly love. Philadelphia kept changing its name, or at least acquiring new honorary names. After the great earthquake of AD 17, it was briefly renamed Neo-Caesarea in honor of Emperor Tiberius, and later became known as Flavia under Emperor Vespasian. Yet the original name of Philadelphia endured, and that is the name by which Jesus addressed the church here in Revelation. But for these reasons, all these names, when Jesus promises to give his people new names, that too would have resonated deeply with the church at Philadelphia. What do we know about the Christian church itself? Very little, except that it was small. It appears to have been weak in numbers and influence. Nearby Sardis probably seemed far more successful and impressive. Philadelphia may well have suffered from an inferiority complex. Yet Jesus saw things differently. One of the striking things about this letter is that in it, Jesus gives the longest description of himself of all the 7 letters, and that to this, the smallest church. It is almost as if he is saying, you may seem unimportant to others, but you are very important to me. The body may be weak, but the head is strong. Jesus introduces himself as the one who is holy and true and holds the key of David. These titles belong to God himself. The Holy One is one of Isaiah's great titles for God. By using it of himself, Jesus is declaring his deity. Then he says he is the true one. In Greek, the word for true also carries the sense of real. Jesus is saying, I am the real one, the real McCoy, if you like. He is the real vine, the real bread from heaven, the ultimate reality behind every symbol and shadow. In describing himself as the one who holds the key of David, Jesus points back to Isaiah 22, where God said of his faithful, trustworthy servant, Eliakim, I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. Here in Revelation, Jesus applies these words to himself. The authority symbolized by Eliakim's key reaches its complete fulfillment in Jesus Christ. He is the true steward of God's kingdom. He alone has authority over the king's house. He opens doors no one can close, and closes doors no one can force open. That is deeply encouraging for a small church. Their future did not depend on their strength, wealth, their influence. It depended on Jesus Christ. Let's look back into the Old Testament and a situation involving an open door. In Numbers chapter 13, we read about how Moses sent 12 men to sneak into the promised land and spy out the situation, to determine if it was likely that the Jews could conquer and take the land. Only 2 of the 12, Joshua and Caleb, came back with positive reports. They recognized an open door of God's promise. Oh, how the church of God needs men of faith and character like Joshua and Caleb today to recognize open doors to true life, to witness, to evangelism, and to spreading the gospel. All this talk of opened and closed doors reminded me of a picture, a vision I had a good few years ago, and it still pops up in my consciousness from time to time. There is a dark hallway. A man, a bit worse for wear, is on his knees, struggling to get a rusty key to work in the lock of a dingy door. He seems oblivious to the fact that behind him is an open door. Sunlight is coming in from a sunlit garden. And God said to me, I want you to come to terms with doors that I have shut in your life. Leave their locks alone. Don't meddle anymore, for I have opened new doors for you. I have opened a door to light and opportunity for you. Turn around in your mind. Turn around in your mind and walk through my open door. Let's take that image, that contrast, that challenge to heart. Turn to your person next to you now and say to them, rise up and walk through God's open door. Let's do that right now. Let's have a look at 3 aspects that Jesus praised about this church. Firstly, verse 8, they obeyed his word. You have kept my word. To keep, the word means more than simply believing it, it means obeying it. This little church simply did what Jesus told them to do. And there is tremendous spiritual wisdom in that. Real success in the church is not measured by size, reputation, or popularity, but by obedience. Jesus notices faithfulness that nobody else notices. Small churches often think nobody sees what they're doing. Jesus Christ does. People serving quietly in those churches often think that nobody notices them. Jesus Christ does. He sees every act of faithful service, every unseen prayer, every quiet word of encouragement, every cup of tea served, every chair put out, every microphone placed on a stand, every visit made in his name. And also in verse 8, they did not deny his name. The Christians at Philadelphia openly confessed Jesus as Lord, even in a hostile environment. When the Roman world demanded allegiance to Caesar, they remained loyal to Christ. They were courageous. And then in verse 10, they endured patiently. This may be the most challenging quality of all. We live in an age that wants instant results, instant success, instant growth, instant solutions. But the New Testament constantly calls Christians to patience. You see, there are two ways to live our lives. One is to live only for today. The other is to live in the light of God's coming kingdom. Christians are meant to be people of the future. The kingdom is coming. We already taste it now, but we still wait for its fullness. And because Philadelphia believed that, they endured patiently. Jesus would rather have a small church that is faithful than a large church that is spiritually empty. Then Jesus gives 3 beautiful promises to this church. Firstly, the promise of opportunity. I have set before you an open door. Verse 8. Philadelphia may have seemed weak, but Jesus had opened opportunities for them. Often throughout the New Testament, an open door means an opportunity for the gospel. So Philadelphia, which was established to promote Greek culture, was having the door opened of opportunity to proclaim the gospel of Christ. This ties in strongly with what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 9. A door of opportunity has been opened for me. When Christ opens the door, nobody can shut it. The important thing is not human ability, but divine opportunity. Sometimes churches waste energy trying to force open doors that God has shut, while ignoring doors he has already opened. Jesus was saying to Philadelphia, you may think you're insignificant, but I have work for you to do. Secondly, he gives them the promise of vindication in the face of enemies, also from verse 8. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Much like the hostility Paul experienced when he said, many are against me, so too the Philadelphia church faced opposition from hostile Jews, whom Jesus strongly describes as a synagogue of Satan. Yet Jesus promises that even these opponents will one day recognize that Christ loves this little church. What an extraordinary reversal. The best victory is not destroying enemies, but winning them over. I can't imagine anything more beautiful and moving than to know Christ says, I have loved you. To know we are loved by Christ, that is awesome. Thirdly, the promise of protection from verse 10. I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming. Jesus promises special care during times of trouble. Some people like to think this refers to a rapture of the whole church of Christ. That view doesn't make sense to me because this was a promise specifically to this church in Philadelphia. And indeed that church was kept, was preserved, after all the other 6 churches mentioned in these chapters had disappeared. But this is not a promise saying that Christians will never suffer, but a reassurance that Christ watches over his faithful people. They will survive and indeed flourish. This fledgling church may be weak, but the Lord is strong. Then Jesus says in verse 11, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have. The return of Christ gave this church strength and perseverance. Their task was simple: keep going. He warns them not to lose their crown. This is not about losing salvation, but losing reward. In the ancient Olympic Games, victors received a wreath placed upon their heads. That is the picture here. The Christian life is a race requiring endurance. Yes, faithfulness matters. Finally, in verse 12, Jesus gives magnificent promises about the future. Whoever overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. To people who lived among collapsing buildings and fleeing crowds, the promise of permanent stability was wonderful. A pillar stands firm. In the New Testament, leaders such as Peter, James, and John are called pillars because they were dependable and steadfast. Jesus promises his people permanent stability and belonging in the presence of God forever. Then in verse 12 come the 3 new names. The name of God, name of the New Jerusalem, Christ's own new name. Philadelphia constantly changed names throughout its history. Jesus promises a final and eternal identity. And wonderfully, he says that even he himself will have a new name in the age to come. Everything will be made new. This is about a final revealing the full nature of Christ. This echoes what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 12. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. So the question that intrigued me after all this studying I've been doing into Philadelphia was, what then happened to this church at Philadelphia? History shows that it remained faithful for centuries. Over time, Philadelphia became one of the strongest Christian cities in Asia Minor, with churches, bishops, monasteries, and a substantial Christian population. When Islam swept through Asia Minor, Philadelphia was the last of the 7 churches mentioned in Revelation to fall. So Philadelphia flourished through the Byzantine era until the 1300 and something, the 14th century. And if you think, well, it was established in somewhere around presumably the middle of the 1st century, and it lasted 1300 years. Let's think about that time scale in relation to this church. This church was founded around about 1899. So if this church lasts for 1300 years, that takes us up to the year 3,200. So it sort of puts in context, perhaps, how long the church at Philadelphia actually survived and flourished. Think about that. Ephesus was the great metropolis. Smyrna was wealthy. Sardis had prestige. Philadelphia had little strength, yet it remained steadfast the longest. Even today, among the ruins of ancient Philadelphia, one feature especially remains: pillars. And what delighted me was the realization that these pillars are not the remains of some Roman or Greek cultural edifice. They are the pillars of the Byzantine Christian church of St. John the Theologian, dating from the 6th century. David Pawson has described standing among those pillars and reading Christ's promise: "I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God." The promise seemed almost written into the ruins themselves. Philadelphia was small, but it was not insignificant. The world may have overlooked it, but Christ delighted in its faithfulness. The message to Philadelphia is deeply encouraging for ordinary churches and ordinary Christians. Jesus is not primarily looking for greatness, wealth, influence, or reputation. He is looking for faithfulness. This little church kept his word, confessed his name, and patiently endured. And because of that, Christ opened doors before them, protected them, and promised them an eternal place in his kingdom. Perhaps some of you here today feel that you have little strength. Perhaps physically, perhaps emotionally, perhaps spiritually. You wonder whether you have much left to give to Jesus. Philadelphia reminds us that Jesus Christ is not looking for impressive strength. He is looking for faithful hearts. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Amen.